Hello and welcome to the big picture. It's almost 10 years since the civil nuclear agreement between India and United States was discussed and over 7 years since the final agreement was signed. However, the deal largely remains in a limbo. The Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act passed in 2010, according to the United States, has been the major reason why the deal has not moved forward. Meanwhile, with the US President Barack Obama scheduled to visit India this weekend, the efforts to find a solution to the stalemate has gained momentum. The nuclear contact group established during Prime Minister Modi's visit to US last September is meeting for the third time today. As far as diluting the liability law is concerned, there are strong objections to it within the country, while the US and the nuclear reactor suppliers feel that they would not be able to do business without it. Some new proposals have been made from the Indian side to overcome it. We will discuss today how feasible is the prospect of finding a solution to the stalemate and how important is it for both India and the US to find a solution. To discuss this, I have with me an eminent panel of guests: G. Balachandran, Consulting Fellow, Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis; Lella, Ponappa, former Deputy National Security Advisor and a retired diplomat; Bharat, Karnad, Research Professor in National Security Studies at the Center for Policy Research; and K.P. Nayar, Consulting Editor of the Telegraph, who has reported from the United States for over 1.5 decades. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Karnad, coming to you. First, you think that this group which has been established a few months back, is it anywhere near finding a solution? What are the problems they are facing?
Well, I'm given to understand that the group has met. They have a plan, a scheme to work around the liability law that we have. And the solution has also been carried by some news reports which suggest that they're going to have an insurance pool under the aegis of the General Insurance Corporation of India. And that this would take care of the liability beyond the 300 million covered under the Convention for Supplementary Compensation that India has signed. So the problem there is that, and this is the problem I think that is agitating a lot of people, is that because General Insurance Corporation is a public sector entity, it means the Indian taxpayer will end up paying for the liability that's traceable to an American technology supplier.
Right.
So that's the problem. The whole idea is, after the 1984 Bhopal gas tragedy, if you recall, that the Union Carbide got away by paying nothing at all.
Right.
And got away scot-free. So the Liability Act was brought in to prevent such things in the future. And this is where I think things have gotten stuck. I'm not sure there's a way around it, unless Prime Minister Modi means really to disregard an act of parliament, which is really not possible.
How can the act of parliament be disregarded? You will have to bring in amendments, I'm sure.
Correct.
If you have to.
Correct, but it will not be politically feasible, I don't think. Primarily because BJP, if you recall, was one of the main supporters of the Liability Act.
Right.
When it was debated in Parliament.
Right.
And when it was passed with a majority. So, as I said, I don't think the ruling dispensation is in any position to push this compromise we've just talked about.
So the political aspect of this whole thing is also very important. Lella, Ponappa, is it necessary for India to push this forward at this point of time?
Well, I think the whole process of going in for civil nuclear cooperation was a very major game changer, not just in India-US relations, but in terms of India's global position. As also, of course, with regard to our own energy requirements and the need to harness nuclear power to the maximum possible for our energy requirements domestically. So yes, I think it is important for it to go forward. The kind of solution that might come up, Dr. Karnad has already indicated one possibility, and I understand one of your other panelists has a very fine piece on the IDSA website listing various alternatives. And so I will not get into that. But I think politically, strategically, it is important not just with regard to India-US relations, but with regard to France, with regard to Russia, with all other partners with whom we have entered into agreements. the point of the agreement was not just to be a game changer notionally, but to help India's civilian nuclear power program. And to that extent, it should be made operational through accommodative methods within the ambit of the laws in all the countries concerned.
Okay. Dr. Balachandran, Leela Ponappa spoke about energy requirements. We have been discussing this, we have been hearing about this for the last 10 years, ever since this whole thing started. And at this point of time, some of what was supposed to have been done by now, we know, all of us know that it has hardly taken off. Except for what we are doing with Russia, none of the other nuclear programs have started. So you think that in the present circumstances, talking of energy requirement, if you're talking purely from energy requirements point of view, you think that India needs to go forward and find a solution to this stalemate? Because, because only 3% of the total energy requirements are going to be met by the nuclear energy, even after, say, till 2030.
Look, that's the long term. I will not go into what are the long term projections, how it can grow. The point is this. It is not just a question of years. With Russia, there's no problem. We have signed NPCL and Russia have signed a contract because of an intergovernmental agreement absolving Russia of all liabilities. So we will have no problem in getting Russian reactors. But beyond that, we will not have any reactors from United States. Let us say you don't change the law. I mean, the problem is there. The Indian suppliers have not so far been agreeing to supply to NPCL either. So if neither the Indian manufacturers are willing to supply to NPCL, nor the foreigners are willing to supply except Russia, then the Indian nuclear program is for all practical purposes dead. Because NPCIL is an operator, it's not a manufacturer. All the pressurized heavy water reactors are manufactured by Indian suppliers. If they don't want to supply, who is going to make the Indian pressurized heavy water reactor? Now that would be the broad conclusion. But there are two elements to this. The rules that are framed under the Act have a certain degree of latitude for both the Indian and the foreign suppliers to come in. Now let's take the case of Indian suppliers. There are certain interpretations of the rules and the Act which make it likely, make it reasonable that the Indian suppliers will be able to supply even with the right of recourse. Now, of course, they want the insurance cover. Now, what Dr. Bharat Karnad said about GIC is a little bit strange. I got an insurance with GIC for my car. So what, is the Indian public paying for my car? No, I pay an insurance premium. Then the insurance company collects premium from a lot of people and then allocates the risk. So it is nobody saying that if there is an insurance pool, that nobody will pay the premium. It is a question of premium paying and the risk being covered by the insurance company. Now, incidentally, this is a case all over the world, and the nuclear insurance is one of the most profitable insurance business ever. For instance,
no,
in the US,
Mr. Balachandran will come to the other aspects.
Okay, so the insurance company, so it's there.
No, we'll come to the other aspect. I think Leela Ponappa wants to respond, and I'm sure Mr. Karnad also would like to respond to what you said. Yes, Leela Ponappa?
Yeah, you see, this point about insurance is very interesting because while we're talking about the nuclear aspect here, I recall when INSAT 1A went up, there was first, if I recall right, an abortive launch. And the satellite was insured. I think one of the Indian PSU insurance companies was the lead, but they had formed a consortium. The point is that this is a little different from a personal insurance of a car, but although the point regarding the premium having to be paid is absolutely valid. The import of India's nuclear power program is fairly large, and I think the balance of interest is something that would have to determine to what extent Indian public funds, whether through a PSU or whether through the government or the General Insurance Corporation, get deployed in order to ensure that a strategically important program is allowed to go forward. Because failing that, very clearly, this is not going to proceed. Also, with regard to the Russian programs, yes, Kudankulam 1 and 2 were grandfathered, so you do have the waiver clauses. But I understand that for any further nuclear supplies from Russia, the sentiment, the preference that has been conveyed is that they do comply with the Liability
Exactly.
Act.
So if the question is, Nayar, KP Nayar, how important is it for the US to work this out? You think that all this momentum, all this talk now which has started is because of the pressure on the US president to work out something when he comes here, at least some kind of a basis set here for that?
Well, I have been covering this from Washington from day one.
Right.
And there is a problem within the US system. You see, the nuclear deal came about because the then Republican presidency, George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice were keen on it. But even at that time, down the line in the American system, there was not much support for it. And now the Republican administration is gone. The Democrats have a very strong non-proliferation lobby. So, my understanding is that Obama will make the right noises and all that, but his heart is not in it,
Okay.
But he is not going to tell American nuclear industry that I am against it, So, this, you create mechanisms, you create a contact group, you create a joint working group, but I don't see anything being solved very quickly. The other thing is that, unlike France and Russia, the United States is a very legalistic society. And the lawyers have a stake in it, And these are not ordinary lawyers. These are lawyers who charge astronomical amount for an hour. They work for these nuclear producers. And they have a vested interest in dragging it out, And they will extract the last pound of flesh from this, and they want all or nothing. So I don't see much of a meeting ground even in the contact group on what we can do.
Okay.
So while things may go on with Russia and France, I see with the United States things dragging out. We may paper over it, we may issue a nice statement saying that this has been achieved. But deep down, I don't see much changing after the
Dr. Karnad,
visit.
would you agree with him?
No.
Second point I want to do first is that, we knew this nuclear liability law when it was discussed in the parliament, it was discussed outside the parliament, it was finally passed. I'm sure everybody knew that this is going to be a tough law to be followed by the US. Then why did we bring it out? Why was the law passed in the way it was passed?
No, I think it was a reaction to the fact that the opposition to the deal in the first place congealed in the form of the Liability Act.
Right.
Because those who had opposed the deal then came together politically to support this, and it was passed by Parliament in 2010. So that apart, I think there are two things that need to be mentioned. Dr. Balachandran mentioned... Balachandran mentioned, forgive me. A car insurance.
Right.
Really, this is quite different, as Leela Ponappa pointed out, from a catastrophic incident that will occur because of a nuclear accident. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of deaths and casualties from thermal and radiation and so on, from leaking thermal and radiation, and then effects. Then there is the fact that, there'll be billions of rupees in property damage.
Right.
Public and private.
Right.
I mean, no insurance pool, no insurance company in the world has that kind of financial muscle to be able to bear, in the worst case, in a remote case, an accident of any kind. Now, the reason why Russia and France are slightly better placed than American supplier companies is because both Areva, the French company, supplying the reactor technology and so on, and the Rosatom, the Russian public sector company, are government-owned. Governments and states can afford the cover, can afford to pay out in extreme circumstances this kind of monies. But private companies, as in the United States, whether it's GE, Hitachi or Toshiba Westinghouse, do not have that kind of financial muscle. So that's where I think the American companies become quite crucial.
But Mr. Karnad, Leela Ponappa said that it's very important. This is important that we should move forward because it is not just about India-US, but it's a larger repercussions. India should get into nuclear suppliers group, MICR, all these things. Would you agree with that?
No, I would completely and entirely disagree. The fact is that nothing stops India from exporting its pressurized water reactors that India has specialized in. Our nuclear effort has been very focused on developing these technologies, pressurized advanced water technology, advanced pressurized heavy water reactor technologies and so on. And this we can sell to anybody. We can have them under the IAEA safeguards. As a responsible supplier, we can say we put them under IAEA safeguards. We can, and there are a lot of customers who will be ready to buy. It's just that we have been so weak-kneed because of what we feel the international, mainly Western reaction would be, because we want to be seen as a responsible state under Western definition, rather than seeing or thinking of ways to amortize our investment in our nuclear industry, in our nuclear program. This is our problem. We have been, I think, extremely hesitant to go with our advantages that we have. We have inbuilt advantages with our own technologies we have developed.
So is there a sense of obligation which is driving this kind of a...
No, I don't know what is driving it, honestly. Because as Mr. Nayar has mentioned, the non-proliferation lobby in the US is very strong. The Democrats and Obama administration are not all that keen. So if by deduction it would appear that the Indian government that is seeking some kind of a resolution.
Okay. Yes, Leela Ponappa? And I'm sure Dr. Balachandran also will have something to say on this. Yes, Leela Ponappa, first you.
I think I'd like to respond to Bharat Karnad's point and your earlier comment that that I had stressed that it was important that India join these multilateral regimes, as it were. That was not my point at all. To that extent, I entirely agree with Dr. Karnad about how India should leverage its advantages and capabilities. My point is that it is internationally and strategically important for India to be able to function in this domain and to try to find some kind of resolution. I'm sure there is a commercial interest in the United States, and the United States has found ways around tricky problems in the past on other issues. The shadow of Bhopal is very real, but in many ways I would say that successive governments of India have totally mismanaged that, as a result of which we saw the recent angst when there was the anniversary of Bhopal that was observed just a few weeks ago. So the point is it in India's interests for this deal to go forward? Or let me put it another way, is it in India's interest not to have this deal go forward? I don't believe that's the case at all. So to the extent that we are able to, through diplomacy, through legislation, through flexibility and accommodation, try to take care of our interests in all respects, I think it is worth making an attempt. It may or may not succeed, that's a different matter, and certainly the ayatollahs of non-proliferation, self-appointed ones I might say, because where proliferation takes place, the United States has not acted, and China is a good example. But with regard to this particular deal, yes, there was huge opposition in the United States, but the fact of the matter is that through persistence, both the governments have brought it to a particular point. Right now there is an impasse, no question about it. But I do believe it is in India's interest to try to get resolution.
Dr. Balachandran? Dr. Balachandran, is it in India's interest to find a resolution, or is it that...
Girish,
one second, sir, as Dr. Karnad points out...
Girish.
Sir, one minute, let me finish the question, sir. The question is that is the Indian government more enthusiastic about this deal more than the United States?
Girish, I am totally confused by the discussion. Let me put it this way. It is not the US alone. Has anyone spoken? I have spoken to the Indian industry, Larsen and Toubro, Godrej, and the Indian Atomic Industry Forum. They are not willing to supply to Indian nuclear power program under the current liability regime unless there is an insurance pool.
Yeah.
Now, so what are we talking about saying we'll export this, we'll export that, we'll conquer the world? The India Larsen and Toubro, which is one of the major producers, said it has not responded to any of the tenders of NPCL during the last 4 years. Now, therefore, don't talk about just US. People seem to be confused. Only US is as if. Let me put it this way again. It is not that we need. The Indian industry is the most important, because if the Indian industry is supplied to reactors to India, pressurized heavy water reactors, technically we don't need to import any reactor at all. But the Indian industry will not supply under the present act unless there is an acceptable insurance pool. That's the bottom line.
Okay.
So either you choose to have an Indian nuclear power program, or you say there won't be any. Let me complete, Girish.
Okay.
Well, just because US. Now, the French have not signed any agreement. The French are also not willing to enter any agreement with NPCIL unless there is an insurance pool. Now, the Russians, because of the intergovernmental agreement, they are absolved for 3 and 4, although the agreement says for all reactors at Kudankulam and all future Russian reactors in India. So there is no country which is at the moment willing to supply under the regime, at least without an insurance pool, and the Indian suppliers have definitely said no to any supply of reactor parts to India without a nuclear pool. So there's no So there's no point in just saying US.
So you are saying that it's as important for the domestic manufacturers.
Well, look, the problem here is that it's all right for the Indian government.
More, Girish. Let me complete my sentence.
Very quickly, sir.
Girish.
Yes.
Girish, there is no need to anything. An agreement very easily feasible without changing the law and with taking into account the concerns of the US producers, suppliers. There is a easy way out. We need not change the law, and yet we can see that the American suppliers are not put to an unlimited liability. We can do that. It can be done.
Okay, sir. Yes.
Just one thing. It's one thing for the Indian taxpayer through the General Insurance Corporation and the proposed insurance pool to guarantee the liability or whatever, the exposure to any liability for Indian-made products. It's quite another thing for the Indian taxpayer to stand guarantor for Russian, French, and US technologies.
Right.
That's so basic a thing ought to be appreciated.
So you think? So are you trying to say that if there is going to be any amendments to the law to protect the Indian manufacturers, you don't have a problem with it?
I have no problem at all with this solution, with the insurance pool as guarantor, for as is being talked about. But we should not stand guarantors for foreign companies and their technologies.
In fact, one of the former chairman of the Atomic Energy Board has made it clear that any clarification as far as the section 46 is is going to be
B and 46.
Yes, it's going to be it's going to be a violation of the act.
Absolutely.
So yes,
there are other aspects of this whole debate which doesn't get focused. You see, for example, the whole problem in the bilateral relationship is that the Americans feel a sense of entitlement on this. They did this and we didn't get anything in return. In fact, it was being said.
The recent interviews of Nicholas Byrne clearly makes out that we have stuck to our side of the deal. You have not stuck to your side of the deal.
Well, it was being said at that time. It was around the same time that after many years of trying, the Americans allowed Indian mangoes, irradiated Indian mangoes. So it was being said that we gave them nuclear plants and we got mangoes in return. But the Americans are very smart. Don't go by what the noise what they are making about the liability law. You see, the Americans have not set up a single nuclear plant in the last 30 years, if I remember, within their country. So their nuclear industry is not like the French nuclear industry actually. So, but they are pushing it, they are pushing it very hard in the public domain. But they are trying, I am sure that they are trying to get something in return for having done the deal, And my feeling is that they will eventually settle for defense contracts, They won't, it is very clear that they are not going to get nuclear contracts because this will take a very long time. But if they have a sense of grievance, they have a sense of entitlement, they can ask for something else in return, and they would push for defense contracts. They would push for other things. That is a quid pro quo, I think.
Sir, I'll come to you, sir. First, I'll come to you, Dr. Balachandran. Lella Ponappa, would you agree with that? That this is some kind of a pressure tactic being used so that they get something else?
Oh, without a doubt. I think not just Nicholas Burns, many other people in the US establishment have in effect sulked about the state of bilateral relations over the past 4 or 5 years. They claim that on the last Obama visit, President Obama openly declared US support for India in the Security Council, but if you recall, it was a very highly qualified and personalized statement. I still have to see a categoric US government statement supporting India in the Security Council. But I personally believe that the quest for the Security Council seat is not something we should be chasing. We have many more important things to do. This deal, coming back to the importance of this deal and whether it needs to go through, there are different aspects. There is the aspect of the India-US equation, both with regard to the deal itself and the larger bilateral relationship.
Right.
There is the question of India's power requirements, of Indian companies, Larsen & Toubro, possibly the Balachandran group, and so on. So it comes back to this. What is in India's interests? We have a certain energy requirement. We have factored nuclear into it. According to some people, there should be zero nuclear. That's an argument. Right now, the fact is that we have a certain nuclear component. We wish to develop it. But can we do it totally on our own? Possibly, but it might take a little longer. Can we use international partners? That is the assessment. We've used international partners in the past. There is room for both. Is it worthwhile trying to get something done? Now, Bharat's point about should the Indian taxpayer be paying for this kind of cover? That's a judgment that has to be made. Net, in balance, is it worthwhile? Was it worthwhile putting satellites into space and having an Indian company provide that insurance cover? That again was a value judgment. Today we talk proudly of ISRO's achievements. So we have to take a judgment call on each of these things going forward. I believe it is worthwhile.
Finally, you think it's worthwhile. Dr. Balachandran, quickly, sir, we are running out of time.
Look, when 4 years ago President Obama came, we promised that we will ratify CSC. Now, if CSC is ratified, the right of recourse becomes null and void. That's all.
Dr. Karnad, very quickly.
No, I don't think, look, the point is...
No, Dr. Lella Ponappa's thing, is it in our interest? Ultimately, we have to, that is the final, is the call which the country has to make.
Yes, as I said, we are not completely innocent of
and not
technology.
At any cost, but we have to find resolution.
No, but the point is that we are developers, we have developed our own technology. How come we are not giving credence to that technology and pushing it and installing our reactors in India to produce your nuclear energy you want, rather than relying on foreign suppliers whose reactors are not tested? Meaning, other than the Ariva, the American reactors are not tested.
And as he pointed out, they themselves have not started a nuclear at 30 years. I think we need to end the debate. We have run out of time. But this has been a very interesting debate, though it looks as if some kind of a solution is being found. But from the discussion from all my panel, it's quite obvious that it's quite a complex issue and there may not be an easy solution to it. We'll wait and watch what kind of declarations are made when the US President is here. Thanks to all my guests, Lella Ponappa, Dr. Balachandran, Bharat Karnad and KP Nayar. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, Big Picture, same time tomorrow.